Hi everyone, I'm Fiona Young from Hable Architects and welcome to Making Space, Empowering Practice.
Hi everyone, my name's Dion. I'm from Monash University in the design department. Welcome to our presentation. We're excited to be presenting to you today. We'd like to start by just taking a moment to consider some questions which have really framed Making Space and certainly framed Fiona and I in our collaboration as researchers and designers. And that question is around, how we might empower teachers to activate innovative learning environments. So a couple of keywords there are, empower and activate, and kind of points to the idea of teacher agency. We're interested in what this activation looks like. How does it manifest as a practice for teachers? And how, as a practice, is it part of a teacher's sense of how their practice evolves generally? So how does a teacher practice evolve as a result of this activation? So as at Making Space, we're asking these questions to help empower teachers, and we'd like that empowerment to become part of a sense of community, particularly as professional learners. We recognise that there's great value in creating a common language between designers and teachers, and the Making Space process for Fiona and I has really been a story about how we kind of co-create that common language. We really believe that teachers can be empowered by ILEs, and we believe that the innovation associated with an ILE is activated by the teacher and by teacher practice. So we've divided this presentation into three parts. Firstly, we'd like to talk about a little bit more about our backgrounds and how we came to collaborate together. Then a little bit of context, and Fiona's going to talk about space and practice. And then I'm going to walk you through the Making Space workshops. Okay, firstly, to our backgrounds.
So I'll start. So in my role at Hable Architects, I act as a conduit between design teams and schools and helping realise the potential of new learning environments. And so that's very much directed me towards my research, which is around learning environment affordances and how to support teachers and to enhance their use of these. And this particular part of my research I explored through a participatory action research methodology.
And my background is really in teaching and in design, but I'm a design lecturer at Monash University in the Faculty of Art, Design and Architecture. And the focus of my research has been on how a collaborative design approach can help engage teachers, and in turn help support new practices that are brought on by new innovations, broadly, but in this case, more specifically, innovative learning environments.
So I'm now going to talk a little bit about space, practice and affordances. So to give a bit of context, over the past decade, billions and billions of dollars have been spent in Australia and New Zealand on the development of new school buildings. And many of the new spaces being developed are innovative learning environments, which is a term that the OECD have coined. And what it refers to is spaces which are larger, more diverse, and are much more connected than traditional learning spaces or traditional classrooms. And what we know is that often these new ILEs aren't used in the ways in which they were intended in the design. And so Halpin picks this up really nicely when he talks about open plan school designs acting more as containers for conventional as much as for more enlightened modes of teaching and learning, and that the key variable for the success of ILEs is not space, but teachers' intentions and educational aims in terms of how they go about using it. So the concept of affordances is a really useful way to help think through this relationship between space and practice. The concept of affordances was coined by Gibson in the late 70s, and what it refers to is the action possibilities that are enabled as a relationship between the environment and the user. But what's really, really interesting about this relationship is the idea of perception, and that spaces aren't used unless a user perceives the possibility of using that space. And this is influenced by a user's abilities and their intentions about using space. And overall, that's influenced by the socio-cultural context in which they exist. So through our research, we recognise that there's a lot of research out there on buildings and the design of buildings and spaces themselves, but there's actually not a lot on how to use spaces or how to support teachers using space. So in fact, as French points out, there's little emergence of new teaching learning practices despite the new spaces. And so that, for Dion and I, has really informed and fueled our thinking around the development of making space.
So on to part 3 then, because part 3 really follows on from what Fiona was just saying in how we then went forward in our collaboration, designing these co-creative encounters with teachers, which we've come to call Making Space. And each workshop built on the preceding workshop in really starting to get a sense of what was working for the teachers and how this kind of collaborative process was essentially and necessarily one of emergence. The first workshop we called Making Connections, and the teachers were asked to connect learning principles, which you can see there on the yellow cards, to spatial qualities. And the spatial qualities have been identified through Fiona's research. These are the spatial qualities of an innovative learning environment. So teachers would discuss these learning principles and really start to connect with the learning principles and how much the learning principles spoke to their own practice as teachers and what they valued as teachers. Teachers were asked to connect that learning principle. You can see one example here with a range of spatial qualities. And there was a transparency that was put across this sheet, and the teachers would then draw using a chalk marker, either using a blue line to indicate how a learning principle might be enabled by the spatial quality, or using an orange line to indicate how the learning principle might be constrained by the spatial quality of the innovative learning environment. And there were a range of results, as you'd expect. The teachers could then start to elaborate and sort of annotate these results. And it generated a lot of discussion around not just the learning principles themselves, but how these learning principles are necessarily given practice context in relation to these spatial qualities of an innovative learning environment. And the outcomes of that then fed into the second workshop, which we called Making Systems. And Making Systems was engaging with a more elaborate, well, metaphor in this case, and it was the metaphor of a solar system. And we got the teachers to create their own solar system and start to connect to each other's solar systems. And really the solar system was a system of practice, the system which took into consideration things like spatial qualities of an innovative learning environment, but also things which were part of a kind of greater system, perhaps, which impacted on their practice, systems that come from within the school or systems from outside of the school. And through the metaphor, there was a kind of creative freedom to play with the idea in a way that felt a little bit kind of lighter, I suppose, than often conversations around systems or the tensions that different systems can create, and start to really create a sense of connection, this time through the metaphor. The teachers, stuck their solar systems up on the wall of the innovative learning environment that we were doing the workshop in. And you got a sense of a bigger sort of constellation of systems. So what we wanted the teachers to do was to build outward. So from within the systems that they were recognizing, the connections they were recognizing within their own solar system, to start to connect to each other's systems. And what emerged was a sense of how there was a lot of kind of common ideas and common language, but there was also language used, particularly like words like collaboration, but were used or applied in very different ways. We might be using the same word, but the way that it manifests in practice was often quite different. And how it impacted on their teacher practice was often quite different. So the sort of affordances of an innovative learning environment here are seen to manifest in different ways for different teachers. And that sort of was supported by what Fiona was talking about previously, is that teachers actually have different perceptions of innovative learning environments. And these types of activities help to surface those perceptions. They're often very difficult to describe. They're very difficult to name. They kind of come as tacit knowledge from within practice. But this activity helped to surface that knowledge for the teachers in a really generative and playful way. And what we decided to do at the end of the workshop was to capture the outcomes of these solar systems and the conversations themselves as a kind of a postcard from the solar system back down to planet Earth, which we're hoping to get to eventually. The teachers, took a Polaroid photo of the teacher, and the teacher wrote a postcard from their solar system. And that was essential for how we led from workshop 2 into workshop 3, because we did come back down to Earth, and we wanted the teachers to start to map how they were practicing within their current learning environment, whether it was an innovative learning environment or a traditional learning environment. And that meant literally drawing a floor plan of their space and thinking about how their current practice, what their current practice looks like, and then imagining what a future practice might look like. So, again, this involved using things like transparencies and chalk markers and stickers and all sorts of playful triggers. And the playfulness helped the speculative process as teachers began to really imagine a future practice and some of the tensions that might emerge from that imagined practice, but also some of the possibilities. The feedback we got from the teachers throughout this process was through Fiona engaging with the teachers in a participatory action research process and semi-structured interviews. But obviously it was useful feedback because we could then get a sense of how the teachers were really experiencing these workshops. And there were very positive responses from the teachers who felt like they were being kind of prompted to really engage in imagining a future practice and thinking about how they could start to move towards those practices and where they felt they needed to be as teachers in new learning environments. And again, this fed into workshop 4, which was similar to workshop 3 in that there was mapping involved. But in this case, it was more like a field guide for that map. So we got the teachers to build a field guide of their own practice. They were given a template for a little booklet that they could construct. And the field guide became a way of really capturing what was going on in their learning environments and what they saw emerging from those learning environments. So we asked them to take the field guide back into their classrooms and to start to become a sort of researcher of their own practice. And then this fed into the final workshop, which has become our namesake, Making Space. And Making Space was really then about applying all of the knowledge which had been built over the preceding workshops and consolidating it into one final activity where the teachers could literally start to map themselves on the learning environment, innovative learning environment space. In this case, a build which was about to begin. The floor plans for this new build existed, so we could print the floor plans onto a whiteboard surface, which was a sort of paper substrate. And we had an opportunity to get the teachers to use whiteboard markers and draw and mark and kind of play again with how they saw themselves fitting into the context of this new learning environment. The teachers were given other materials to start to imagine how students might move around these spaces or how furniture might move around these spaces. And they could draw and annotate and kind of share collaboratively what they saw as their future practice within this space. It was important during this collaboration that they then started to name some of the protocols which might become really significant to how practice occurs within these innovative learning environments. And it was very important that this was done collaboratively. Again, some feedback we got at this point was that the teachers really felt that they had a lot more freedom in this space than they perhaps previously thought. And certainly they started to recognize that there was an agency that was starting to become significant to them. And in this case, the teachers describing it as being fluid or recognizing that there's a lot more fluidity in the space than they originally thought. And this sort of fluidity in the creative process that they had engaged with gave them a sense of being empowered, being the creators of their practice within this space. And it was very encouraging to see teachers recognizing that they were feeling empowered having done these workshops, and that this sort of sense of empowerment emerged through the process of engaging in a collaborative and creative way. Fiona and I are continuing this work, and more recently have been playing around with different materials, engaging again with whiteboard materials and magnetic materials, and seeing how we can develop making space into a singular encounter, and also looking at how making space might translate into a virtual space as well. So here we're looking at building a Miro board and getting teachers to collaborate virtually.
So we're really keen to continue exploring what this activation might look like. And we'd love to continue the conversation with you and to pick up on some of the questions and comments that have come through. So please join us virtually for a forum to discuss these things on Thursday, the 2nd of September at 4:30 p.m. The forum will be hosted by Hable, and so we'll be sending an invite to all of you here today for then, and we really hope to see you there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody. I hope to see you online again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.